Hi there, and welcome back to Convergently Speaking. This week I have a fantastic interview for you with an old mate of mine. I've known Jesse Size for over a decade now, and in that time he's always been a man of wisdom and integrity, but also always up for a laugh. So enjoy the interview and make sure you keep an ear out for the little nuggets of wisdom that he drops throughout. Alright, so today on Convergently Speaking we have Jesse Size. How are you, mate?
Always a pleasure to be able to hang out with you, Dan, especially when you're able to venture north to be able to come hang out with me here.
That's right. Well, that's a good segue, actually. I'm up in Port Augusta at the moment, which is north of Adelaide, a few hours, and this is where Jesse actually lives. I've just come to visit. So you moved up this way a while. How long ago? And do you want to tell us a little bit about why you came here? And yeah,
sure. Well, the reason why we're in Port Augusta is because my wife spent some time here many a moon ago. She did an occupational therapy placement here in Port Augusta, and the place kind of got under her skin. And she grew up in kind of rural locations, so that was pretty familiar for her. And we'd probably gotten a little bit weary of urban life and the busyness of it, and just how difficult it is to catch up with people regularly when you're so busy. And a long time ago we thought, we don't know what this looks like, but we want to be able to move towards Aboriginal community in some way, whatever that would look like. We didn't know, we just wanted to be able to, we just felt like that was something we needed to kind of explore as part of what it means to be Australian. So, and living in a smaller community meant that you can live more simply. So there were a few things that kind of lined up in terms of building a life in Port Augusta.
And for those that aren't familiar with Port Augusta, you mentioned connecting with Aboriginal community. Obviously, there's a big population of Indigenous folk here. And do you want to set the scene a little bit about some of that history?
Sure. Port Augusta is regarded as a meeting place. It's the crossroads of Australia, according to some. You've got to pass through Port Augusta if you want to go west or east or north, and it's kind of like the doorstep of the outback. Yeah, we've got people from everywhere. It's about 15,000 people. We used to have a coal power station that was a large industry. Now the biggest industry is probably the prison, a bit of a renewable industry growing, and I forget what the percentage are, but
for a second I thought you were saying that the prison industry was a renewable industry.
It is. It is.
Sadly.
Yeah.
It's one that continues.
Yeah. And we have probably about a population of, I forget exactly, but I think it's between 15 and 20% of Aboriginal people. So there was always an opportunity to be able to engage, I suppose, with Aboriginal people. Without kind of making that the big focus thing that we're obsessed with or anything like that. That was just one of the things we wanted to be able to move towards. And I think we'll kind of, there's a slower pace in places like Port Augusta, which certainly appealed to us. And a lot of people who live in Port Augusta really enjoy that too.
My dad came up here for work. He moved up here about 20 years ago, and he works in the criminal justice system, or corrections as it's called, as a social worker. So and he's the same. He likes the slower pace. So what have you been doing since you've been here? And when I say you, your family, and
Yep, so I've got my wife Chelsea, and we've got two little kids now, but they weren't here when we came here. And we've been doing really kind of different forms of community work. We've worked a lot in schools. I was working as a community wellbeing coordinator, and I've done some school chaplaincy. Over the period of time, I ended up becoming an ordained deacon in the Uniting Church. So I'm a reverend, and a deacon is a bit of a unique thing. That means sometimes you might work in a church, sometimes you might work in the community, and that's sort of been the story for a long time, where I've moved between church world and community world, and sometimes there's been a lot of overlap. Sometimes it's been one or the other. So I worked for a church for a couple of years. I've also kind of spent some time working as a drug and alcohol counsellor in a residential rehab. One of the ways we did kind of be able to learn to engage and journey with Aboriginal community is through, we're sitting here now in the Port Augusta Aboriginal Islander Christian Congress Church, which is part of the broader Uniting Church, and currently my wife and I are ministering here as well. And that journey started a long time ago, and we simply came and just journeyed with people, sat with people, learned from people. Didn't say much, just tried to soak up and learn as much as we possibly could as a bit of a learning opportunity, and I guess to encourage and support people already doing beautiful things in the community.
Fantastic. So you've done heaps of different things in Port Augusta, but I mean, from knowing you, the continuous theme that I've observed in your life is a care and compassion for people and wanting to see them grow, and I don't know how you'd word it, but reach their potential and find healing. And is that on point? And where did that come from?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's my nature. I'm an Enneagram 9, and I kind of come with maybe a beautiful and yet naive hope that we can all be one with ourselves and one with each other, that we can move towards difference and somehow find community in the midst of that. That's something that lives deep within me, and probably something I've had to discover, but it's kind of my orienting kind of reality as well. And so all the different things that I do, it's always kind of with a hope to kind of move towards others, to build community, to establish connection, to meet people where they're at, is what I try to do, and what I hope to do in different forms.
We've discussed the Enneagram a little bit. I've intentionally had different, like Steve the other day mentioned that he's a 2, and listeners have met Caitlin, but I'm not sure if we mentioned that she's a 9. But yeah, it'd be cool to hear a little bit about being a 9, and I mean, the first thing that comes to mind related to all that you've said is the fact that the 9 is known as the peacemaker, or that's one of the names. And I mean, that's what it sounds like you're saying, but in different words, moving towards people in that way. Tell us a bit about being an Enneagram 9.
I think being a 9 is a bit of a complicated reality, and a contested reality, because if you know much about the Enneagram, and you're kind of subscribed to the influence of the wings, 9 has on its wings kind of an 8, which is kind of like the bull or the boss, and likes to be able to get one's own way, and is willing to aggressively pursue that at all costs. And then the 1 wing sometimes comes with a reforming spirit and, a desire for, I want things a particular way, and I know you identify as a 1. So you can speak plenty more about that, but I feel those influences within me. And so while I want peace and connection and harmony and all of those wonderful things, there's also a big part of me that wants things my way, and I want them in a particular way, which if it comes with a sense of internal conflict sometimes, because I hate the idea of feeling like I'm burdening or harming another person. I don't want to kind of put someone else out, but I do really want my own way, and I want things done a particular way as well.
I remember a memory of you from years ago being in a group that you were running, and I remember, and I've done a lot of group work, and so it was from the perspective of someone who knows how to run groups, thinking this guy is a master, an absolute master at running groups. And I could tell that whilst your listening skills, your attentiveness was second to none, that you weren't a pushover, and you knew why you were there, and you knew what you were trying to achieve and where you were going. And it's that beautiful, it's subtle what the 9 can do, and all these kind of like the wings and the whole thing, that it's like, yeah, this guy might be lovely and caring, but he's no pushover. And I suppose there was a safety in it. I mean, safety is a good way of framing it, but there's like a need for control as well, and it's there is that paradox within the 9.
I think, when it all goes well, a 9 can address and speak really difficult things to others, but still maintain relationship.
Yeah,
can be a very effective way, but it can also look a lot of different ways. And some of the ways it looks like is, avoiding conflict altogether, or being entirely disconnected from one's own experience, or just feeling overwhelmed by the flood of perception and emotions and relationships. And I know all about that. And relationships can be very tiring. I love them, but then they're also my kryptonite as well. So that's a very real reality. And I suppose for a 9, what I really want is to be able to be, I don't want to lose my sense of disconnection with myself, my sense of purpose. I'm always trying to protect that in some ways. And so if I feel like that's being imposed upon or saturated by some other agenda, then the tendency or the inclination is to run away or hide in many various forms. And I'm sure, Caitlin will do that in a very different way than I will, because we're all kind of different, but there's still that mechanism of, I don't want to lose my inner stability, and so I'll deal with that in however I will. And I'm a classic self-preservation 9, and probably the image that I have of that is, I remember when I was a little boy, I'd often have dreams of a tsunami coming and these giant waves coming and crashing over me, and that's that kind of feeling of being overwhelmed by something bigger than myself, that flood of perception or whatever it is. And that very easily leads to disengagement or avoidance, or in classic terms, sometimes they describe the 9 as being slothful or lazy. It's not so much that, it's that protecting that precious little flame, but you might be somewhere else to do that. In the self-preservation form anyway. It's different in other forms.
I've read that, for all of the other 8 Enneagram types, the most pathological and unhealthy expressions can be like pretty bad, pretty severe, but for a 9, the most unhealthy expression would be something like lying on the couch under a blanket with a bag of chips and maybe a block of chocolate, watching TV, and basically just like numbing out. And so really the person that is hurt or harmed the most by that is the 9 themselves. Do you relate to that mechanism? I know Caitlin loves that
I do.
Way of escaping.
I think like a 9 has to learn that that numbing out isn't actually doing a whole lot for you other than just avoiding reality.
Yes.
9s who are really healthy learn how to relax in a way that renews you, and in a way that fosters and nurtures engagement. But disengagement is actually undermining the very thing that a 9 wants. We want that sense of connectedness, and how easy it is for us to zone out in a million different ways, and I do that all the time, often because reality is inconvenient and uncomfortable and exhausting. That's how I feel. I don't know how if other people feel like that often, but I do feel like just reality is pretty bloody tiring.
I agree.
So I've had to learn to counter that.
Tell us about how you relax then.
Sure. So one of the things when I'm going good that I really avoid is when I get home from work, don't sit on the couch because that, like I said, that feels like relaxation, but it might not be. So for me, anything that centers or grounds me is actually really good. Like going for a walk is really helpful because I can clear my head, but I'm also in my body, and so I can become aware of what's going on in my body, which is a real challenge for a 9 who, if we numb out, we become disconnected from all the different messages and all the different stories we're carrying in our bodies as well. So that's a way of becoming reconnected, but it's also kind of, relaxing and good and healthy. Journaling's really good for me because I clarify, what do I think about this, not what does everyone else think about this, what is everyone else's agenda.
Because it's really hard for 9s, isn't it, to know what you think and feel.
Yes.
And all of that.
Well, I mean, we're trying to dial down reality in some ways, so we miss some of the cues within ourselves, and 9s, out of the desire for harmony, also have a bit of a tendency to merge into the other as well. And so often I'm far more aware and connected to what another person is experiencing than I am my own experience, basically. That can easily become a pattern and a habit. So I need to break that if I'm going to be a healthy 9 in a way. I don't want to give up being aware of other people. That's a good thing, but I want to be more aware of myself as well, so I can be more balanced. And if I lose that awareness, then I'm actually kind of pretty crappy in my relationships anyway. Also kind of things for me, like anything that's sort of centering or grounding. So journaling, centering prayer is pretty important for me. Just being able to kind of have proper downtime with family, that's really important. And it's also the discipline of my mind as well, not focusing on too much on what I got to do tomorrow or next week or next year, or focusing too much on yesterday or 4 years ago or whatnot, but just trying to be present in reality now.
Yes,
it is all about that engagement, and that's true for everyone, but that's what a 9 has to pay attention to.
I mean, to use catchphrase, mindfulness, it's massive, isn't it, for the
absolutely 9? Yep. In a whole body sense, that's something that I've had to kind of learn how to do, to learn how to process in real time what's gone on within me. And the body's a better, more reliable indicator of that than our thoughts and, even our feelings. Like, they come and go, and they're triggered by lots of different things, and they're things we're quite conscious of, but there's a whole swathe of things that live in our body that really speak powerfully and reveal a lot of truth. And if you're disconnected from your body, then, you're not paying attention perhaps to some of the most important kind of sources of information, whether we've been kind of carrying a clenched jaw or, we're not sleeping properly or we're exhausted. They usually point to a bigger reality that our brains might not even be paying attention to.
And I mean, that's another area that you and I have connected on, is the area of trauma and somatic base. So this idea that it's not an idea, this fact that we store trauma in our body. And you've actually worked a bit in that space, haven't you? I'd love to hear some. I know we've both read some Peter Levine and a few other guys as well that have... Thankfully, I'm seeing it become more mainstream now. I'm hearing more and more people discuss this idea that if it's trauma, it's not just a thing in our head that if we talk about it or fix, even though that might be necessary and helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. We all kind of we accumulate these trauma stories, and we warehouse, all sorts of emotional matter in our bodies over time and in our minds, and they're difficult and they're complicated, and sometimes they're disturbing as well. And so, we kind of push them down, but they catch up with us in various forms, in different fixations and patterns and even addictions. And, I've probably kind of learnt the most by kind of being aware of my own attachments and my addictions, and which, we get caught out usually when life happens, and the way we've been doing things for a long time just don't work anymore. And I sort of definitely experienced a lot of that through sometimes kind of burnout, or even some mental health stuff, or just my emotional health not being where it's at, or, just my body not doing as well as it could. And having to revisit, well, whatever it is, there's something going on here. I need to get curious. I need to reckon with what's happening here. And working in schools in community here, and really especially in the residential rehab, working with folk who are living with addiction. Pain's obviously a big part of that. Trauma's obviously a big part of that, and a lot of our residents would have a really traumatic kind of pain story. It's not that they've been kind of drinking too much and eventually, things are out of control or whatnot. It's usually self-medicating. There's a lot of pain that I've been carrying, and I don't know what to do with it, and I don't know how to access it, which is true for all human beings to a large extent, and perhaps especially for males. I don't know. It's been true enough in my own story, and there's pain and woundedness in our lives. It contains either some uncomfortable truths or some hard stories, and we want to kind of avoid those things. And so in a shorthand way, I think trauma and pain for me is something that I think we all need to learn how to sit with, and to somehow try not to be so afraid of it that we need to numb it or push it away. But also in the way that we recover from trauma or heal, we often need someone who's able to sit with us in that place as well. Not that they fix it. Sometimes they might give us some insights or help us to learn some things or to put some things together, but I think there's just something powerful about being with someone who cares, who is caring enough to allow you to discover the courage to be able to access your own story, your own pain, and to begin to make sense of it.
And they help us co-regulate, or we help them depending on what role we're in, I know when I was working with traumatized young people, there's this co-regulation of your hopefully quite calm nervous system resonates with their nervous system, and it helps bring that down. And I mean, I only have a 9 wing in my Enneagram type, and I still felt like I have a bit of a superpower in that regard, that I can bring a calmness that, like, I've had this reflected back to me. It's almost like an unfair advantage, because I come in fairly calm. People can only hear you. I mean, I know you, and I know that you emanate a calmness, and that's just a powerful thing when working with people with trauma.
Yeah, and I mean, you learn a lot about what happens, say, through emotion coaching and connection. I've learned as much as anything from my own little ones, because they're jumbling messes of emotion, and the rational brain is either just not constructed yet, or it's still kind of it's in construction, and so we need that. In simple terms, we need that kind of right brain connection, that non-verbal presence, and grounding. We need to learn language that helps make sense of our experience. And the crazy thing is that when we are able to find that language, it literally regulates our system. It calms it down. And so we begin with connection, and then we're able to kind of move towards language. We're able to calm our system, but not by ourselves, not when we're little.
So what you're saying is that as a parent, if you assist your child to regulate and then calm, then their rational and logical faculties come back online a bit more. Which I suppose the reverse of that is that prior to that, they're not online. I mean, I've learned that as a parent as well. It doesn't take much to have a young person, like a kid, become so emotional that they can't think straight and they can't communicate their needs.
And if you ask them what's going on, they literally have no idea. They need to be able to kind of basically be able to bridge the hemispheres, the left and the right brain, to be able to kind of make sense of their experience. And that's what, the privilege of a parent or an adult in someone's life can help them to do. And perhaps they've never had language for it, and so you're making sense of your experience as you go. We learn to regulate. It's a developmental milestone. It's not, it's a capacity we learn through the adults who hold us and calm us and speak to us and help find language for what's going on. But it's no different as adults, we still regulate and calm when somehow we can't really properly understand our own experience until sometimes someone else understands us. It kind of paves
well, that's
the way.
the mirroring. You know, that is the other role that a parent is meant to play, is to mirror to a child who they are. And that's why kids, I don't know, your kids are like, but mine constantly are drawing and painting and constructing and performing and wanting feedback on it.
Yeah.
And I mean, the only appropriate feedback is good. That's great. You've done a good effort, and then they'll be happy, because that teaches them to build an ego and an identity and all that kind of stuff.
When I see my 2-year-old, she's I can tell she's really upset. I can tell probably why she's upset, but she may not have learned that yet. And her bottom lip will be down, and she's, storming. She's just bit her brother and whatnot. And part of my job is, to go, oh, Pearl, you look really sad right now. And then, when you say that, you can see, things, the system sort of calming down, and she'll kind of sink into me, and then we can kind of begin talking. We connect first, and then we can redirect and all those sorts of things.
Gosh, it's hard. I think Caitlin's better at that than I.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're so right. To name those emotions and to help them, name them for them, because they don't realise what's happening.
If we're trying to kind of behaviour manage in a way, there's obviously we have to do that as well, but if that's all we're doing, instead of kind of, teaching kids, what's going on and helping them to kind of develop the capacity to self-regulate, we'll always have to be in the role of regulating them. They won't. That is a developmental milestone.
Yeah.
It's something that we all need help with to get there. And, those classically naughty kids in school or wherever who struggle so much often just haven't had that developmental opportunity to kind of form those things in the way that they need. So it's a resource we draw upon and we need.
For sure. So I've got a question that people ask me and I sometimes take for granted, and that is that, when you're in these type of roles where you're helping and caring and, as you say, being aware of others' emotions and these kinds of things, how do you, not burn out or not, basically spend every night sleepless, worrying and how do you not take all that on in a way that's crippling? What do you do to process that and to sustain? Because you've been doing what you do now in some form or another for a long time. How do you sustain that?
In some ways, I think about, how like paramedics, they can go and see blood and guts, and they're not kind of really fussed by that. And you almost get a sense that some people are almost interested and curious about those sort of situations. They almost want to be in those situations. I don't know what it is or why it is, but I feel kind of like that a little bit with people's kind of, emotional kind of situations and their pain. I'm interested to be engaged in it. I think it's a powerful thing to be able to be with people in that place, and I think the rewards that can come from that place for others, these are some of the most life transforming, things if we're able to. And, there's that Joseph Campbell quote that it's sort of a little bit of my mantra, a little bit. And where you stumble, there lies your treasure. The very cave you are afraid of to enter turns out to be the source of what you are looking for. The damn thing in the cave that was so dreaded has become the centre. And that's true in my life, and I think it's true in everyone's life, that we don't want to go into the unknown. We're scared of what might be in there, but there's so many life-giving reservoirs if we can learn to live with our pain and our discomfort in a new kind of way. That's, I think, part of the pattern of transformation. And I'm really, it's kind of Joseph Campbell, he kind of talks about it. It's the hero's journey or the hero's quest. And I really do admire anyone who's willing and able to sit with their pain and in certain kind of, like in a role as a counsellor or a minister or whatever, I often feel like my role is to say, that's your cave, but if you want me there, I'm willing to go in with you I'll just be with you as you kind of explore some of those things, and we'll try and make sense of that the best we can. And when it gets too hard, we'll go out, but we'll kind of go in as you're able and as you're willing. And there's always treasure there. And I even in a personal sense, like that's that, the 9 part of me wants to avoid discomfort and hard things, but the heroic part of all of us, and that I'm trying to access within myself, says good things come through discomfort. Good things come from reckoning and engaging with your pain and that sort of stuff. And so even in little ways, like over the last few months, I've even kind of just started having kind of cold showers in the morning, not because of all the unfolding research about the vagus nerve or whatever, which is, I'm sure, really good. But it's also just a daily reminder as I start the day, this is uncomfortable, but you'll get used to it. And I want to condition myself for being in those places of discomfort because I know how rich and rewarding they are. And they are for other people too. So I want to be able to be with other people in that place. And so it can be difficult. And sometimes I'll go home feeling like I've got some really painful stories living in my body as I go home. And I have to, obviously be sensible about that. But in other ways, it's the most energizing stuff. And it's the most life-giving stuff because there's always, life that comes from that,
Yeah, I resonate. And I feel similar. It's like I feel alive when I'm in that space with people. Yeah. And it's such an honour. And, lately, the last almost a year now working with people with pretty severe lifelong mental illness, to be invited in their world and to be a support. And just the presence, as you say, is really honouring.
Well, most of us skirt around on the surface of our own lives, and we don't engage with, the reality of our experience in a lot of ways. And so I guess that's some of the things I've learned as a 9, that's where life is. And so a life of engagement and connection and entering in is something I really resonate with. And, as a minister, in the Uniting Church, every year the Christian calendar starts with this Advent, and the first lectionary passage, and I've never heard anyone explain why it is this, but the first passage that we start the Christian year is always about the destruction of the Jewish temple, which is kind of like bad news, because the temple was kind of the sense of stability. It represented the whole worldview of these people who followed God. This was a nightmare that the temple had been destroyed. And I always think, why does the Christian kind of liturgical year start with this story of this dismantling of the temple, And I kind of think that it's kind of the journey that we all need to kind of experience, because we all have, these sources that provide us with stability and kind of whether they be, traditional sources of power or knowledge or expectations that society has kind of made pretty clear for us. And then things happen, for all of us at some point. Like life happens and, we lose jobs or we get sick or someone close to us dies or whatever. And it feels, like our temple is being kind of destroyed in some ways. And so we have to learn to live in this kind of liminal space where there's uncertainty, there's chaos. And my hunch about why the Christian calendar begins like that is because, in a sense, we're on a journey of having our own temples reconstructed, and that temple isn't something that lives outside of ourselves. It's something that we become living temples in a way. That's what, from a theological perspective, we're temples. We host the living presence of God within us is the idea.
Yes.
And I think we could all relate to that, in terms of this process of not living by externals, but discovering this inner authority. We become the authors of our own lives. And you see that with people who enter into the reality of their lives, the hard things, the pain. When you're able to kind of name your story and begin to take responsibility for it, then you can kind of begin to choose where the story goes next. And it's never easy, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it can happen without accurately naming your experience and being honest about it in some way.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I spoke about that on another podcast.
Yeah.
It's similar. Yeah, this a balance between acknowledging the pain and acknowledging the hurt that was done to you, and at some point as an adult taking ownership of working to heal that pain and hurt. Not ownership of it happening, not blaming oneself, but taking ownership of that. As you say, taking back your story is immensely powerful.
And there's lots of different ways that different people speak of it. You know, we in Joseph Campbell's Heroes, quest, you begin in your ordinary world, and for all intents and purposes, for most of us, we assume things are going pretty well, and we like to maintain our ordinary world, and even to the extent of pretending that everything's great. But the reality is, we can all grow, we can all learn, we can all process and move towards greater wholeness or healing or whatever language you want to kind of use. And so there's a necessary separation, usually through something that happens to us, and then life initiates us in usually really positive ways. When we undertake that well, we can kind of then there's a return process of entering into, life is never the same on the other side. We've kind of won some gifts through the trials and challenges that have happened, which is never easy to identify and name in the midst of the hard things, but it's a wonderful thing to be able to acknowledge. We've got some form of order, then there's disorder, and then there's we find reorder, or reorientation, all those kind of things. I just think it's the way we grow as human beings, and how we process, and that's why I do find it interesting and appealing to be able to be with people in the disorder, because in some ways it's better than the order.
Yeah.
There's a pathway for growth and healing. So I like that.
Yeah. So what's something for you that came in and created disorder when you had order? Is there a key point or a few key points that shook you up and that you weren't the same since?
Yeah, I think to bring it back to my 9ness is because I kind of live with this basic value of doing no harm to others, not wanting to ever hurt anyone. And so what I struggle with is when people seem to intentionally hurt or harm other people. And so when I see or experience people doing shitty things, it always blindsides me. I never expect it, and I really have a hard time processing it or making sense of it. And in a sense, there's a letting go of a naive perspective of reality. In the real world, there are lots of different forces at work, and ego stuff, and ambition, and fear. It drives a lot of what we do together, and it destroys beautiful things. And I grieve and lament those things, and find it hard to bounce back from those things, and wonder why. Why do people do crappy things? Intentionally, not by accident, but intentionally. So I struggle with
malevolence.
Yep. And I think, living both in church world and non-church world, when I see it in church, I find it harder because you think, we're really supposed to kind of take the love thing really seriously. We're supposed to take ownership of, our fear, our anxiety. We're not supposed to dominate others. We're not supposed to kind of destroy people. But that happens all the time. And so I find that really hard, and I'm learning to kind of how to navigate that and to not let that stop me from still engaging. Because all of a sudden there's a part of me that wants to go somewhere else and do something else.
And I mean, for those outside of the church, the story lately has really been just full of that. That narrative has been full of that, with the different abuses that have gone on in different churches, not just one isolated event. What are you, as someone who's representing the church and someone who's a minister, what do you do with that, and how do you, I don't know if reconcile's the right word, but how do you make sense of all that? And
I think the most helpful thing in a way is to not ignore it. And from I guess, a Jungian perspective, there's always these things lurking in our unconscious that we are totally oblivious to. And so when these things come to surface, every part of us wants to deny or explain them away instead of engaging with what they are. And so obviously there's some really horrible things that, they're wounds that need to be healed in people's lives, especially if we're talking about abuse like that. That's really horrible. But I think there's other ways that the church is still stubbornly kind of finding hard to listen to, and part of the new thing, and has been happening for a while, but the church still kind of blocks its ears and closes its eyes to a little bit, is we hear more and more how the church isn't and hasn't been good news for, particular people for a long time. And the image that I have a little bit is at home, we've got our lawn, and you place a sprinkler in the middle of it, and it kind of is fine for, the centre, the bits on the edges that the water just doesn't get to, and they wither and they die, and it's the not good part of the lawn. And I think that the church is kind of hearing, or at least we are hearing ways in which, those edges, they just don't receive the water, or it's not good news, and part of me is always, I'm drawn from a compassionate perspective to move towards those edges. I want to be able to acknowledge the things that the church, the ways we're not good news. And I think there are opportunities to heal collectively, but there's a whole lot of resistance that you bump into. So you have to you got to pay attention to realities. That's confronting, and there's conflict, and you questioning things we've always taken for granted. So people don't want to do that. That brings different conflict and different challenges, and it can be exhausting. And so that's just something you have to work out over time.
Yeah. And I mean, for those that know Port Augusta and within the South Australian psyche, it's considered a bit of a place on the edge, like you're talking about, a place that has been neglected or the water hasn't traditionally landed. And then within a microculture within the Port Augusta context is the Indigenous community here. So you've really come to Port Augusta, and then you've gone even into a more, I don't know what the word is, a more edgy, a more edgy kind of place. How do you navigate that as a white fella running a church? And I know that you're in this role, you and Chelsea in this role in the interim. Yeah. But I'd love to hear some of how you navigate that, but also some of what you've learnt from the Indigenous culture and the Indigenous people, and what that can teach us as Aussies.
I think part of the learning that I came with in the early stages, especially, but kind of throughout, was it kind of felt like we were trading in a foreign currency, in a sense that the knowledge that I brought, the things that people back home valued in me, just no one really cared here. And so part of the process, was recognising kind of in some ways my bankruptcy, that I couldn't really come as an expert by any stretch of the imagination, and had to come as a learner. And I think that's true wherever we go, but it was just very obvious and pronounced here. So it was really kind of a lot of kind of just sitting and learning. I don't know what our presence meant to other people during that time, but I think one of the helpful things we came with was, and this is not just about Aboriginal community or whatnot, but we just recognise in any community that has its share of vulnerability, there's always amazing people doing amazing things that probably aren't getting a lot of press or spotlight. And so probably a helpful thing that we kind of came with, well, let's try and find, some of those people who are already doing kind of great things, and let's just, support them, champion them, encourage them a little bit. And so there are lots of wonderful people doing amazing things here in Port Augusta, and so it's just been a gift to have a front row seat to the things they're already doing. Some of the things that really inspire me, and some of the people that really inspire me, there's an Aboriginal dance group called the Dusty Feet Mob who are part of this church, and they tell stories about the stolen generation, and they have a really powerful dance where the children are involved, and someone comes in during the song and Archie Roach's song took the children away, and they yanked this child out of their arms. And for a lot of people, when they go into schools and all around, lots of different places kind of taking their dance and their music, and for a lot of people it's a really powerful way of engaging with our history, which is important. It's been a way that in some ways I've been able to kind of learn and reconcile some of my own identity as an Australian, and they've been the people who facilitated that. And one of the really powerful things is there's a white fella whose job it is to yank the child out of the mother's arms, and on occasion I've been sometimes the person who goes in as the authority who goes in and rips this child who I know by name out of the mother's arm, who I know by name, and I'm able to experience in a real visceral sense our history. It's a really emotionally powerful experience that helps me to access these stories that are our stories. And what happens every time is I would go off stage, so to speak, and I would weep. And every time that happened, there'd be someone from the community, an elder, who would wrap their arms around me, and they would care for me. They'll be the ones who would be embracing me, looking out for me as I'm feeling the full, some of the full power of these stories, for the first time. And they're some of the ways in which I've been transformed by Aboriginal community, how they've enacted healing in me as they enact healing for their audiences and also for themselves as well. So that's been a really profound, beautiful experience and a privilege to be a part of. I think anytime we have the opportunity to do that, it creates disturbance and disorder for us, because it doesn't fit with our prevailing ways of seeing everything and seeing ourselves. And so to have those things kind of turned upside down is a healthy thing, even if it is a little bit disorienting in the process.
Yeah, what a powerful... I could just feel it in my body just thinking about it. Can't imagine what it would be like to see that acted out.
One of the really helpful kind of ways of enacting healing and becoming human that I've learnt about a little bit through my study and through my reading and through some stuff in community is there's this beautiful concept called Dadiri that comes from the Daly River region, and really it means kind of deep listening, and it's pretty similar to what we mean when we talk about contemplation. And it's something that Aboriginal people will talk about, how we've always practiced deep listening, this stillness, and it's a really vital, important thing. Some people describe it as an ancient mindfulness technique, but that's, in some ways, it's paying attention to our own experience. It's paying attention to what's happening around us, and it also has really profound applications in community as well, in terms of the very things that we've been talking about. What happens if we form communities of practice that, practice deep listening to each other? When we're able to bring our whole stories and our whole experiences, our bodies, into a communal experience, I guess for me, that's when healing happens in the most profound way, when we do that together and we're able to name our vulnerability and our struggle. That's what I want for my own life, and it's something that I've learned especially from Aboriginal community. And I've learned what kind of drives or had driven myself and a lot of my contemporaries, from a young age, this kind of upwardly mobile kind of Western liberalism, that we want to kind of find our individual dream and passion and calling. And I've seen now in my mid-30s the way that it's often that, that takes us away from community. We're busy pursuing what we really care about, and it just takes us away from, people. And I think of, in my life, the people that I respect and love the most, we're all in far-flung places doing different things. We're not doing them together. And my family and all that kind of stuff, I'm away from all of those sorts of things. And I've seen the way here's, part of the story is, well, community comes, before the individual. And I don't want to speak in broad general ways to say this is true for all people in all places, but it's been part of my experience here. And with that comes a deep sense of belonging. And I remember one of the things that shocked me was when conflict would happen here, and there's conflict all the time, and you'd learn what's happened and what's been said, and I would think, gosh, that's the end of that. There's no way back from that. They will never talk to each other again. They'll never be in the same room together. And then the next day they're hanging out and everything's kind of seemingly kind of swell. And I go, what the heck is going on? And I think there's a commitment to each other and a grace and a forgiveness and a sense of belonging and the priority of community that prevails. And so that's something I've learned about as well, my own rugged sense of individualism would probably kind of just give up on people or go do something with someone else somewhere else,
Sure. Yeah, so it's those bonds extend much deeper and much just really profound. Yeah,
totally. And that's what I want to recover in my own life a lot more too. Be better if I was speaking about our life, and that's when I want to move more towards the language of us than the language of me and my and I and all that kind of stuff, because I have found over time in terms of well-being, we all it's hard to maintain a really solid sense of well-being for all time. And I think that I kind of work really hard to do everything right within myself, to be at my best, and even still life is really hard. And there have been times where I've felt, well, stuff kind of self-care. I want community care. I'm not strong enough today to be at my best. I just want someone to come in and kind of be with me in that place. And they don't care what I've done, who I am. They just love and care for me for who I am. And so I long for that kind of community where I can just belong in community and I can be as I am, and on those bad days, I know there'll be people with me too.
Yeah, it's that acceptance for just being yourself without having to actually perform or achieve something or impress someone. And I hear you and I agree. My time in the third world, interacting with, especially in Zambia, interacting with the communities there, it changed me forever. When I was 20. In a way that I realised what life set up to actually focus on relationships and have relationships as a centre point, what that actually practically looks like and feels like. We were meant to run this youth program, and the pastor from the church we're associated with was a couple of hours late, and my Western, with my little bit of German heritage, was not happy about the schedule not being kept. And slowly but surely over that experience, I learnt that these people are always going to prioritise relationship over the schedule. And that stuck with me, and I've continued to see that really through anyone I've met from a culture other than white Western kind of culture. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that's superior and that, but we're out of balance. I think we're out of balance in the West.
Absolutely. I mean, we're herd creatures, and so let's say there was a pack of wild horses and one of them gets separated from the pack. Every time that horse will get sick and it will eventually die. And I think that that makes sense of the state of mental health in kind of most Western places. I think where these wild horses have been separated from the pack through not bad things usually, but just through pursuing our lives, which take us to endless places often, but away from people sometimes. It's just bloody hard to do relationships, and everything I know about kind of well-being suggests that when you have the village, when you've got those people around you, life is good. We're generally happier and more resilient as well. And when we don't, and I guess I haven't been kind of in the professional world forever. I'm still only in my mid-30s, but I kind of know that work is great. I like the things I get to do, but I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket, because work can easily blow up, and that's happened for me in different ways. And if that's your primary identity, and if that's where you're putting all your energy, and if that's the thing you care about, it can go good, but it can also go really bad, and we're not always in control of that. And obviously that, we're not in control of how our relationships go, but I still like the idea of being able to really kind of deepen those connections and with people where those connections are grounded in grace and forgiveness and moving towards each other and hanging in there when it's tough.
Yeah, and I think that's really hard because especially as blokes, we're taught to find our sense of identity and all manner of things, find it all at work, and to unattach from that and rewire where we're getting our identity, or at least get it from a number of places. It's not simple and it's not easy, and I don't think the system really supports us. I've had friends that have, and you talked about it at the beginning, that have worked part-time quite intentionally, and those surrounding them, and I've done it myself too, those surrounding them will not pat them on the back and say, good on you for having some balance in your life. They will look at it with suspicion. Why is there a man who could work 5 days a week but choosing to work 4 or 3?
Yeah.
We're not taught. And it's not implicit, but there's this message that, relationships are for women. Men, we're rugged, tough individuals, like you were saying, and we have to do it all on our own. And then we have this phenomena that so many men, when they retire, fall into depression, and they just don't know what to do with themselves because they discover that was their whole identity, or they just continue to work till they die because they're so scared of stopping. And they don't know what to do with themselves.
Absolutely. For me, part of when things kind of blew up in some of my kind of work stuff, part of the joy was being able to just expand my identity and be really involved in kind of the parenting at home, which is another identity, as well, that, may not be a permanent identity in some ways. So, you're always building on kind of, foundations that are temporary. But I think it helps to kind of expand your identity and not put all your eggs in one basket. But, it's been such a beautiful joy, and the biggest joy, I think, the last couple of years, just being so involved in, the lives of my little ones. They've been really kind of, just really renewing for me. It's been a lot of joy there. Mind you, you kind of can, it's not hard to scan ahead and see the difficulties that come as well, not just with the life that happens, but, even, you talked about men retiring, but then, this notion of being empty nesters, and people navigate and experience that in different ways. But, someone talked about kind of parenting, being like the longest breakup of your life, and because like my kids, they I'm a huge part of their world, and increasingly, if I do my job well, I'm less significant.
Yes. Look, I got a 6.5, almost 7-year-old, and you see hints of that, and I only see hints of it, but I can see it emerging where there's attention aimed towards their friends rather than me, usually when I'm observing it, and it's like, I can see what is coming down the line, and as an introvert, as you are too, part of me is like aware that I'll get some time to myself, and yet I know when it comes about, it will be such a normal part of my life to have my kids always looking to me as as their source of joy, or to affirm them, and when they're a teenager, I can see that they're going to be looking for that affirmation from their peers, and not there yet.
Neither, but yes. Even the other day, the kids were playing independently on the playground for the first time ever, and so the way they did that was my 5-year-old, he could help the little one, the 2-year-old, kind of get up to the next level of the big giant climbing playground by, he would lay down and she would climb on his back and she would be able to get up, when historically they would be calling out, Dad, you need to help us out, you need to help us to get to the top, which meant that I could sit back and, read a book while they just played, which sounds like something I've always wanted.
Yeah.
But I had this little flash forward, I'm like, they can do it without me now.
Yeah.
They're fine. They're super content. They're not even calling out to me. They're just playing, which is beautiful. And yet there's still the reality of there's an identity thing that's shifting and will shift and has to shift there.
Yeah. Well, you've had quite a journey, and maybe it's my counselling training, but I have this impulse to do this summary and just really name a theme that I've been seeing reflected in everything that you've said, which is this theme of an impulse to hide and run away and protect, and then almost like a conscious value where you've taken on, I don't know what the word is, like a rugged, unwavering commitment to not give into that, and to not buy into that early developed mechanism that you got as an Enneagram 9 to try and numb out. Narcotization, there's the word. I was trying to think of it earlier. That's what they refer to what the 9 does. It's narcotizing. And that's really beautiful to see you're setting up your whole life in a way to try and challenge that notion, but almost like preach that message and be a verbal and living example of, let's not give in to the status quo and just numbing out. And I mean, I know you well, and I know you'd love to sit on the couch and watch footy all day long.
I do that.
And you do that. And it's not like you're overcoming this impulse, and you never will fully overcome it because it's there within you. But this, I don't know, this effort to not give up. It's like the addict that, keeps going back, but doesn't give up, trying to quit, is cool. And I love to speak with people that have this courage to look their devils in the eyes, and in your case, sit with others as well as they look. And I do that too, looking their pain in the eyes. So that's cool. So I'm really glad you're able to come on, and I'm really glad to share that you're able to share this message, which I really resonate with. And it's a very lived experience for me as well, because I'm married to a 9, and they say 9s are the best people to be married to. I've heard it said. Fantastic.
I'm married to one too.
You're married to one too. But it's a journey to be alongside an Enneagram 9 as they start to discover and embrace their own needs, their own desires, their own views, their own perspectives, and not just numb out. Now, there's nothing wrong with 9s relaxing and chilling out, but when it becomes, that sort of pathological level, so...
it must be frustrating to kind of be so close to a 9 and see them sleeping at the wheel of their own life and having to wake up constantly again and again.
Yeah, it's such a great metaphor, sleeping at the wheel of your own life. Yeah.
That was a very good paraphrase though, Dan. You're a very good counsellor and a very good podcaster.
Thanks, mate. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on, and I look forward to getting this out to the folks very soon.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Well, that's it for Convergently Speaking today. Hope you gleaned a few insights from my mate Jesse Size, and I'll chat to you next time on Convergently